This training is entitled Trauma. Now, this training will be longer than some of the other videos, and so I'm going to break it into parts. So, part one of trauma. What is trauma? Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physical or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Recent research has revealed that psychological emotional trauma can result from such common occurrences as an auto accident, sudden job loss, relationship loss, a humiliating or deeply disappointing circumstance, the discovery of a life-threatening illness or disabling condition, or other similar situations. Traumatizing events can take a serious emotional toll on those involved. Even if the event did not cause physical damage, this can have a profound impact on the individual's identity, resulting in negative effects in mind, body, soul, and spirit. Trauma is when we have encountered an out-of-control, frightening experience that has disconnected us from all other sense of resourcefulness or safety or coping or love. Traumatic events often cause feelings of shame due to the powerlessness they create, which can lead to secrecy and further embed the experience of shame. It then becomes something to be greatly feared and avoided. It is at this point that negative coping behaviors may start and may continue until a person decides to face the difficult emotions that surround the traumatic experience. Here's what Dr. Brene Brown had to say about shame.
So, first of all, let's just talk about shame. You've studied it.
I did.
Not many people have studied it.
No, in fact, I wanted to study it, and a lot of people said, no, don't study it, don't study it. And then I was kind of a rebel rouser, you know, a little hellraiser. And so I thought, oh, no, then I'm going to study it, definitely, if I shouldn't study it. And I go to the stacks at the library at our college, and the first article I pull says the decision to study shame has been the death of many academic careers.
Oh, my goodness.
I was like, student loans, death of the career. I'm like, oh, my God.
Wow.
Yeah, you know why?
Why?
Nobody wants to talk about it.
Yes.
We have a visceral reaction to the word shame.
So you say that if you're like on an airplane and somebody says, oh, what do you do? And you say, I study shame, people, they literally turn the other way.
I have answers based on whether I want to chat or not.
Yes. And the
I
answer.
study courage. Oh, yeah. I study shame. Oh, these angry birds are fantastic, aren't they? And that's it. Wrap it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the 1, 2, 3 is about shame. We all have it. It's the most human, primitive emotion that we experience.
How do you define it?
The intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging.
And
the
does it
devil.
occur after a particular incident, or does it occur over, many life experiences?
Both.
Both.
It could happen in an instant. You know, there are specific memories that we can recall that can bring up shame for us. But there are also very insidious, quiet messages that we just marinate in over a lifetime.
This is what I've always known about and tried to get across to people. And don't think I was successful at it, really, in the 25 years of the Oprah Show. The thing about abuse, and particularly sexual abuse, most people think it's about the sex. It's really about the shame that occurs after the sex. And it's keeping it the secret, and we're only as liberated as our secrets. And the secret creates the shame, and you end up feeling like you're a bad person. And it's the shame that damages your life. The actual act itself, people can get over that, but it's the shame that you carry with it.
There is no question in my mind
No
that that's
question
truth.
about that.
That's just truth.
That's
like God truth.
Yeah.
I think shame is lethal. I think shame is deadly. And I think we are swimming in it deep.
Do people recognize it
No.
though? I think people don't
So
recognize
people
it.
have one or two reactions when I say shame. They
Yeah.
say, I don't know what you're talking about, but that has nothing to do with me.
Yep.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm not talking about that. But here's the bottom line with shame. The less you talk about it, the more you got it. Shame needs three things to grow exponentially in our lives: secrecy, silence, and judgment.
Yeah.
So you put shame in a petri dish,
Yeah.
and you douse it with a little secrecy, a little silence, and a little judgment. It grows exponentially. It will creep into every corner and crevice of your life.
And shape all of your
Shape everything.
Shape everything. The way you think, the way
Yeah.
you think about yourself, the way you think about other people, the way you
Everything.
interact with other people, what you do, the choices you make, who you marry, all of it.
Yeah. You put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and you douse it with empathy. You've created an environment that is hostile to shame.
Wow.
Shame cannot survive being spoken. It cannot survive empathy. So if something really shaming happens to me,
And you talk about it.
and I call you and I say, oh God, Oprah, it's Brene, you're not gonna believe what happened. I'm in such deep shame. And you say, what's going on? And I tell you, and you express empathy.
Yes.
Shame can't survive it. Shame depends on me buying in to the belief that I'm alone. You know, I have a good friend, Robert Hilliker, who I work with, and he's a therapist, and he always says, hey, keep the shadow up here because it can only take you down from behind.
Whoa, that's good.
Yeah.
The impact of these events does not simply go away when they are over. Instead, traumatic events are profound experiences that can shape the way a person sees themselves, others, and the world. Because the traumatic experience was so terrible, it is normal for a person to block the experience from their memory or try to avoid any reminders of the trauma. This is how they survive. However, the consequences of these survival mechanisms are a lack of integration of the traumatic experience, such that it becomes the experience in a person's life rather than one of many. The trauma becomes the organizing principle from which the person lives their life, always trying to cope with and or avoid the impact of the trauma. This can be both an unconscious and conscious awareness of the experience. This lack of processing of the trauma means that it is ever present for the individual, and they feel as if the trauma happened yesterday when it could have been months or many years since. It's not the event that determines whether something is traumatic to someone, but it's the individual's experience of the event, the meaning they make of it. Those who feel supported after the event through family, friends, or spiritual connection, and who had someone to talk to about it and process the traumatic event, are often able to integrate the experience into their lives like any other experience. Regardless of its source, trauma contains three common elements. It was unexpected, the person was unprepared, and there was nothing the person could do to stop it from happening. Simply put, traumatic events are beyond a person's control. Who can be traumatized? Anyone. No one is immune. It is widespread throughout the world and affects every part of the population. Numerous studies such as childhood, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, or ACEs, suggest that at least 75% of the population has experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. Individuals of all ages, socioeconomic status, culture, religion, sexual orientation can be profoundly affected. Families can be traumatized by an event happening to one or more of its members. Even people who did not directly experience the trauma can be impacted by it, especially if they have a close relationship to the individual who experienced the trauma. Communities can be traumatized when events affect any of its members. Cultures can be traumatized when repeated degradation, attempts at assimilation, or genocide occurs. Following 9/11, our American culture became organized around fear and terror as a direct result of the trauma experienced from that event. In addition, other countries have experienced trauma that has affected their culture, including the Sudan, Rwanda, Syria, and Cambodia. Service providers can be traumatized after hearing these stories and witnessing the suffering of clients who have experienced trauma. This is called vicarious trauma or trauma exposure response, and it happens when a provider is regularly confronted with traumatic content. Institutions and organizations can be negatively impacted when going through times of significant change or outside scrutiny, such as downsizing, restructuring, and things of that nature. Individual staff members may become inadvertently traumatized as a result of this process, and or their own trauma histories may be triggered by events if the process is not sensitively and compassionately handled. So let's look at trauma. It impacts our nervous system, our flight, or freeze. Trauma may or may not be traumatizing. It's traumatizing if the person is not able to stabilize, self-regulate, or make distorted meanings of the event. It the person is handling it well or is not traumatized if they're able to stabilize, self-regulate, grow, or make positive meaning of the event, and so on and so forth. So trauma-informed care and practice. What is it? Regardless of its mandate, every system and organization is impacted by trauma and will benefit from being trauma-informed. Service organizations are confronted by the signs and symptoms of trauma every day and yet fail to see it and make the necessary connection. Trauma hides in plain view. Every system and organization has the potential to re-traumatize people and interfere with recovery and to support healing. People affected by trauma from abusive relationships will frequently encounter services that mirror the power and control they experience in those relationships. Trauma-informed services does not need to be focused on treating symptoms or syndromes related to trauma. Rather, regardless of their primary mission to deliver primary care, mental health, addiction service, housing, etc., their commitment should be to provide services in a manner that is welcoming and appropriate to the special needs of those affected by trauma. Although trauma may be central to many people's difficulties and awareness of it is pivotal to their recovery, in public mental health and social service settings, their trauma is seldom identified or addressed. The symptoms that are creative and necessary adaptations to the effects of trauma are often not recognized as associated with the prior trauma by survivors or clinicians. Having an awareness of how trauma impacts people is essential to the healing process. Subsequently, working with trauma-informed orientation has an impact on the healing and the quality of service provided. At its core, the trauma-informed model replaces the labeling of clients or patients as being sick, resistant, or uncooperative with that of being affected by an injury. Viewing trauma as an injury shifts the conversation from asking, "What is wrong with you?" to, "What has happened to you?" Trauma-informed systems and organizations provide for everyone within that system or organization by having a basic understanding of the psychological, neurological, biological, social, and spiritual impact that trauma and violence can have on individuals seeking support. Trauma-informed services recognize that the core of any service is genuine, authentic, and compassionate relationships. A trauma-informed service provider, systems, and organization realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for healing. It also recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in staff, clients, patients, residents, and others involved in the system, and responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, practices, and settings. The core trauma-informed principles are acknowledgement, recognizing that trauma is pervasive, safety, trust, choice and control, compassion, collaboration, and strength-based. When systems and organizations are committed to integrating these principles at every level, they should consider the following: power and control. Whose needs are being served, and do policies empower those being served or those providing the services? Doing with and not doing to. Explaining what, why, and how. Offering real choices, flexibility, understanding, and being able to identify flight, fight, and freeze responses. They also focus on strengths, not deficits. Examining power issues within the organization and promoting a democratic principle. Sandra Bloom identified 7 commitments that trauma-informed organizations make. These are commitments to nonviolence, emotional intelligence, social learning, open communication, social responsibility, democracy, growth, and change. Trauma-informed organizations also place a priority on teaching skills in the following areas to clients, patients, residents, and staff: self-soothing, self-trust, compassion, self-regulation, limit setting, communicating needs and desires, and accurate perception of others. Emerging practice standards for working with people who have experienced trauma are rooted in the following areas. Build relationships based on respect, trust, and safety. Use a strength-based perspective. Frame questions and statements with empathy, being careful not to be judgmental. Frame the client's coping behaviors as ways to survive and explore alternative ways to cope as a part of the recovery process. Help the clients regulate difficult emotions before focusing on recovery. Acknowledge that what happened to the client was bad, but the client is not a bad person. Recognize that the client had no control over what happened to them. Let them know that the way that they survived during the traumatic experience was actually their way of resisting what was happening to them and of saying no, even if it did nothing to stop the person behaving abusively. Provide an appropriate and knowledgeable response to clients that address any concerns they may have about the services offered to them, and then use knowledge to guide service delivery. Watch for and try to reduce triggers and trauma reactions. When providing and receiving information, inquire about trauma history and facilitate a supportive discussion with the client while keeping it focused on the present moment. Make sure the client is comfortable with the conversation and knows they do not need to answer questions or go into detail. Check in with the client to make sure the discussion of trauma feels safe and not overwhelming. Make time for questions and concerns that they may have. Write things down for clients who may dissociate during encounters. Provide a suicide risk assessment where indicated and follow up with the client when the risk has passed. Inquire about possible history of trauma if a client has behaved or is currently behaving abusively toward themselves. Create a climate of hope and resilience. Acknowledge the client's ability to survive and even grow from adversity. Acknowledge the strength it takes to get to where the client currently is. Refer to the client as someone who has experienced trauma and who is more than what has happened to them. Focus on healing and recovery as possible. Move beyond mere survival to the context of a healing process and let the client decide what path their healing consists of. Let the client know that you believe in them and support their efforts to heal. When providing choices, involve the client in the decision-making process with regard to treatment and service options. Inquire about counseling in the past and offer referrals if indicated. Ensure that the client feels comfortable during invasive assessments and procedures and make adjustments to these processes when the client requests it. Allow the client to set the pace. Slow down and take breaks as required. Continually inform the client of what is happening during healthcare encounters and assessments. Where possible, give the client choices about referrals. Involve other service providers that are already involved in the client's care. When providing choices, strive to be culturally appropriate and informed. Learn about and develop skills to work with the client's culture by asking them about it and understand how your own cultural background can influence transactions with the client. Understand the meaning the client gives to their trauma from their own cultural perspective. Understand what healing means to the client within their cultural context. Be open to learning and asking questions about the client's culture. Be open to referring clients to non-traditional healing services. Become involved in the cultural community being served. Advocate on behalf of clients who speak English as a second language. Work through historical distrust. Issues may exist from the past that interfere with effective service provision. Understanding that this is normal and not personal will help to build a strong relationship. Teach Western ways as skill, not as and identity replacement. People don't have to assimilate to what we believe is right just because it is the norm for where we live. Okay, so this is the end of the first part of training. Um, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer them, and get ready for part 2.